Hello, everybody. I am absolutely delighted to be talking to you tonight. As Claire says, just reflecting on the CBA's past as we reach 80, but mainly then focusing on our role today and what the real objectives of the CBA are and how we want to approach our role as a charity promoting archaeology moving forwards. Here is the very first document relating to the actual formation of the CBA. So this sits in a book behind my desk, and it is a agenda invite to the very first council meeting of the Council for British Archaeology at the Society of Antiquaries in London, Burlington House, on Wednesday, the 8th of March, 1944. At 11:30 a.m. And the agenda, very extensive. Appoint the committee and officers, and then to discuss immediate action to be taken by the council. The story of the founding of the CBA really starts in 1943, when a number of organisations, including the Society of Antiquaries and a number of the county archaeological societies, came together to start to think what was needed for archaeology in the post-war period, what would happen in post-war reconstruction. One of the principal organizations was the Congress of Archaeological Societies that had been founded in 1888 to represent the really strong county network of archaeological societies. And indeed, on the founding of the CBA, the Congress actually wound up and the CBA took on its mantle. And in a sense, our DNA comes directly from those county societies and the Congress of Archaeological Societies. Over the time, we can now see the CBA has had a really pivotal role in shaping what archaeology looks like in the UK, and actually how some of the organisations that we're all really familiar with actually originated out of discussions that were kicked off in the Council for British Archaeology, including the UK's first archaeological research strategy way back in 1948, organisations such as the Industrial Archaeology Institute and the Nautical Archaeological Society. These are organisations that start with discussions in the CBA about the issues that are facing bits of heritage and archaeology, and then they actually lead to being independent charities in their own right, and they're still thriving today. Obviously, really importantly for the CBA, in 1968, the Town and County Planning Act actually gave the CBA a role in assessing applications to demolish listed buildings in England and Wales. And this is work we still do today through our casework and advocacy and our buildings archaeology team, who look at many hundreds of applications every year. The early 1970s were really important for young people in archaeology, with the founding of the Young Archaeologists Club. And in the mid-1970s, the British Archaeological Awards were established. 3 years ago, we actually took on the British Archaeological Awards. They're now known as the Archaeological Achievement Awards, and we're running them annually, with the most recent awards being in November of 2023. The CBA were key in helping shape and come to fruition the Ancient Monuments and Archaeological Areas Act of 1979 that established the current process by which we designate archaeological sites as scheduled monuments. In the 1980s, we have the Institute of Archaeologists being founded, which is now the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists. And again, the CBA was instrumental in setting up the institute originally. 1990 saw our first Day of Archaeology. This has grown over the last 30 years to become the Festival of Archaeology, which is now run over 16 days every July. For the CBA itself, our major change came in the mid-1990s. Dame Rosemary Cramp, who very sadly passed away last year, was instrumental in reviewing the CBA's membership And she introduced the ability for individuals to become members of the CBA. Prior to that, it was just archaeological groups and societies. And then in 1995, our award-winning magazine, British Archaeology, was instigated and is still going strong today. Running parallel to that, we've seen other activities such as the revitalization of the Treasure Act in 1996 and our campaign Archaeology for All in the early noughties. Again, really focusing on how we might broaden archaeology and what it actually means to people. And really coming right up to date, obviously, I joined the CBA in 2000. As we all know, that was a really challenging time with COVID. And my first Festival of Archaeology had to be pivoted almost immediately to a digital festival held entirely online. And that's something we've not actually moved away from. The Festival of Archaeology is now a hybrid festival. And we have many hundreds of activities that take place both on the ground and actually online. And then in 2022, we launched our lecture series, This is Archaeology. I'm delighted to be here now presenting under this title. And what we really wanted for this is Archaeology as a concept is start to help people see different approaches to archaeology, how archaeology as a discipline, we can see it as a much broader and more encompassing discipline and set of questions, and really how anyone can actually engage in archaeology through the processes and questions that archaeologists think about. So again, it's about opening up archaeology to new and broader perceptions. Looking back, though, for me, is really important only if it helps you reflect on the present and start to look forward differently. The most interesting thing I found in looking at the archive of the CBA is actually the emphasis when we were founded, not on the need to protect and preserve archaeology, but on the need to understand the opportunities that were going to be afforded to archaeology and archaeologists through post-war reconstruction. Yes, there's an element of concern about the damage, but there's also this amazing groundswell of almost excited fever about this huge opportunity of archaeologists were going to get to look literally under the city and under the ground of our historic towns and cities. And that aspirational pitch, that really open up, imagining way of looking at what the opportunities are in front of us, is something that I'm really keen that we start to explore at the Council of British Archaeology and in archaeology across the board. And so what I want to do now in the next part of my talk is start to explore archaeology and heritage and the CBA and myself through three strands. And they're three parallel conversations, because in being reflective, you've got to reflect not just on yourself, who you are, your own identity, what shapes your own thoughts and feelings, but what is shaping the thoughts and feelings and approaches to archaeology and heritage, and what does that actually mean for the CBA? How are we going to be more reflective and actually, hopefully, open up wider conversations around archaeology? So I'm going to start with myself. This is the opening presentation slide that I produced for my interview back in 2000. I can tell you my interview was actually this week 4 years ago. So I was sitting down in the CBA offices. I presented my pitch. I had 10 minutes. I was only allowed one handout, and I was to present to a interview board plus all the members of staff at the CBA about what I wanted to try and achieve at the CBA. And for me, the most important thing was, how does the CBA represent the widest possible participation in archaeology, the public value of archaeology, and archaeology being something that encompasses the public, professional commercial archaeologists and academic archaeologists. It's really interesting now, if I was to rewrite this slide, I wouldn't use the word professional here. I'd actually use commercial. So I really mean, how do we bring together commercial archaeology, academic archaeology, and public archaeology to really understand and demonstrate the value of what it is we are doing. My approach has always been based on the thing that I've most loved in my work. As an inspector of ancient monuments for Historic England in Yorkshire, I was really fortunate to go to places and meet people who had the most extraordinary stories to tell about the most extraordinary places. One of my favourite was actually meeting Bob and Jackie Lawrence, who were members of the East Leeds History and Archaeology Society, and their place was Barnbow Munitions Factory just outside Leeds. Barnbow was originally built in 1916 as the first purpose-built emergency World War I munitions factory. Over the course of its life, many hundreds of thousands of women actually worked there. And one particular event in 1916 makes Barnbow really significant. And that is actually the unfortunate occasion where an explosion killed 36 women. This explosion was the largest single loss of life in the history of Leeds. But until Bob and Jackie had got involved and explored the history of this place on their doorstep, Barnbow had literally gone unnoticed. Why? Because, of course, when the explosion happened, it was completely hushed up. If it wasn't for the family members of the women who died and who worked there, the story of Barnbow would have been completely forgotten. But over time, moving up to the 100th anniversary of the First World War, it was Bob and Jackie and the history group who actually brought Barnbow back to life, to the degree that I was really fortunate to get involved with them. And our collaboration led to the site being made into a scheduled monument in 2016 as part of the 100th anniversary of the First World War. And again, for me, it epitomizes this thing. Archaeologists don't always live in the communities where the interesting issues and places and sites are. We need to learn how to talk to everyone around us to find the really interesting stories. The other thing that really influenced me in my thinking was looking at how we use different mediums and concepts and thought processes and ways of communicating to talk about archaeology, not as a thing in the ground, but as a process. And one of my favorite Twitter or X sites is actually called Lego Lost at Sea. It is a feed produced by a lady called Tracy Williams, who lives in Cornwall. And what Tracy does is she goes onto the beaches and she finds pieces of plastic. It's called Lego Lost at Sea because she was inspired by a container spillage back in 1997 when 5 million pieces of Lego fell into the sea. And these pieces of Lego are being washed up on the beaches of Cornwall. And she's finding them, she's constantly posting them. But the post that really caught my fascination was the one on the right-hand side there, which is 4 submarines. Those submarines are actually the free plastic toys that you used to get in your Kellogg's cereal packets. And what she's done is she's laid them out there in sort of size and color order and effectively used archaeological typology as a way of actually showing the dates of these things. And I just found it a fascinating way of starting a conversation using archaeology, but also introducing the whole concept of the environment, plastic in the oceans, without actually becoming overbearing about it. This is a fascinating, engaging site. How can we do this for archaeology? What might that look like? But those issues are really important only if you reflect back on what they mean to you as individuals, to me as individuals, and how it shapes and influences the work in which you do. I come from a very, very traditional British background. I had a very traditional education and I went to university and I ended up in a job where I got the title Inspector of Ancient Monuments, which, if I was doing the job in 1913, I'd have worn the uniform on the right. All of these aspects actually present me as somebody who goes out and tells people what their heritage is. Well, I just don't believe in that. I believe in a different way. Where I want to do is I want to go and find out what other people's stories are. Why a place is meaningful to them. How do we reimagine that relationship? In many ways, the relationship of expertise. And again, something that you find really important and really critical in this conversation is how much of an impact what we write and think can actually have. So this is a statement written by Sir Nicholas Pevsner in his guide to the architectural buildings of the West Riding. So he wrote this in the 1960s, and he said this of the town of Castleford. What can the architectural recorders say about Castleford? There does not seem to be a single building in the centre of town which would justify a mention. Well, I can tell you this had a deep impact not only on the people of Castleford, but how organisations such as Historic England related to that town. Indeed, up until the early 2000s, there were only about 5 listed buildings in the centre of Castleford. Why? Well, every time somebody wanted to go there from Historic England or English Heritage, they picked up Pevsner's guide. Pevsner said, don't go there, there's nothing to see. So literally, they did not go and look at it. And again, it wasn't until 2012 that the Roman bathhouse in Castleford was finally actually scheduled as a monument. Again, what we write and what we say has huge, profound impact on the way people perceive things and the way people do things. We have to think about what it is we do. That whole concept then gets very rapidly wrapped up in really quite critical documents that get written. So for me, as an archaeologist who worked in the planning process, one of the most important documents I've worked to is the National Planning Policy Framework, whose definition of archaeological interest is what is set out here. And in particularly, it's evidence of past human activity worthy of expert investigation. So who is doing the expert investigation? Who are the experts in this context? What does that mean? Whilst I understand why it says it like this, I do find it really challenging that we actually ring fence and define who it is and how it is we can actually explore elements of our past. What you then find with experts, when they think they're not necessarily being listened to or they're not getting the resources they want, one of the things they try then to say is that we're at danger of actually seeing our heritage being at risk. One of the things I've noticed and reflected on a lot as a heritage practitioner and heritage as a whole is how often we like to introduce risk narratives. How often we like to say to people, if you don't love it, you're going to lose it. What does that actually mean? What sort of long-term message is that actually saying? Now, I'm really happy there are reasons why we actually do this. It's really critical in getting sense around funding. But this prevailing sense of what I often see as a very negative narrative can have deep, profound impact. We say to people's communities, they're at risk, you're going to lose these things. How might we shift that narrative? It's not just about archaeological sites or heritage sites. It's actually about the process of doing archaeology. It's whether it's actively live in the planning process, whether it's actually thriving in our universities. Again, a real challenge for us if we carry on with lots of negative narratives. Do we actually talk our own selves into some form of lesser existence? How might we actually change and reimagine that process? There is an awful lot of amazing archaeology done in this country. The planning system works for archaeology. The archaeologists who deliver the planning system are some of the best archaeologists I've ever met. They are amazing. They work in extraordinary conditions. They work in all weathers. We've got to be rightly proud of the archaeologists in the UK. They deliver enormous public benefit. But do these processes really enable wider public engagement in that process? Yes, we allow people in to look at the archaeology, but what does that mean about engaging in archaeological processes, engaging in archaeological thoughts and questions? How might we deepen engagement in that way? A lot is actually made of the value archaeology receives from development-led interventions. It's currently estimated that about £200 million a year is spent on archaeology in the UK through the planning process. My question, is there £200 million of public benefit from that? What does that look like? Don't get me wrong, there is £200 million worth of archaeology that's done. There's £200 million of stuff and reports that's produced, but who is that all produced for? How accessible is it? How open to discussion and debate is it? Now, these aren't new questions. They've been asked for many, many years. Indeed, back in 2011, the Southport group of the Chartered Institute of Archaeologists were exploring these very things. What does public benefit actually mean? How do we actually trigger it more? It's a really important concept moving forwards. And I think as we start to tackle other issues such as climate change and sustainability, we're going to really have to ask ourselves, what is archaeology going to look like in the future? What is the public benefit out of this amazing process that we all love? And just to really hone in on that issue around the potential, the money and the people and what it actually looks like. So in the UK, there are probably about 25,000 active archaeologists, people actively doing or interested in archaeology. How do I get to that figure? Profiling the profession in 2020 estimated that there are 7,000 individuals employed in archaeology, be that commercial archaeology or as employed as academics, or like myself in a charity promoting archaeology. University Archaeology UK estimates that there are about 6,000 undergraduates and postgraduates in any 1 year at university. So that's first year, second year, third year undergraduates and postgraduates, PhD students. Okay, so there are about 6,000 there. In 2018, we undertook a survey of archaeological groups and societies, and extrapolating out of that, we estimated in 2018 that there were 9,700 people engaged in public or community archaeology. What's interesting is when you look where the potential money is. So if you take the fact that there are £200 million in commercial archaeology in this country, if you look at universities, and just simply by taking 6,000 people and timesing that by the average student fees per year, £10,000, you get to £60 million. If you look then at the community archaeology pot, well, what do you get? How do you look at that? For this statistic, I simply took 9,700 people. I timed them by the average membership fee of the CBA, which is £44 at the moment. I then had a look at the sort of average costs that come into community archaeology through something like the Heritage Lottery Fund. So I said, let's say there's 100 projects a year, each being funded to the tune of £25,000, you get to £3 million. So that is commercial archaeology looking at being £200 million, academic, and this isn't actually including any research, being about 60 million, and then this community pot being 3. What does that mean? I'm not saying the community needs more money. I'm saying, how do we join these 3 aspects of archaeology in the UK up to be this collective sum, which is so much more significant when you look at it collectively? What does that actually mean and look like? And this tension in archaeology is really live, okay? We saw before Christmas with this public letter by a number of archaeologists that's now been signed over 1,000 times about the discourse and the language and the rhetoric being employed around the Stonehenge and the proposed Stonehenge tunnel. Now, really interestingly, the CBA has formally objected to the Stonehenge tunnel. We've always maintained our objection to it. But I have to say, some of the rhetoric that's come out of some of the other objectors has been really challenging. But even when you read the letter that's been written, some of the language archaeologists use backwards, for me, is just as challenging. We have sometimes very rigid concepts of what we think is archaeology, and therefore to us almost sacrosanct. And of course, when you start to put this in relation to other people who have created or have spiritual identities that they look at in terms of place and identity, you often get to this deeply contentious and conflicted area. And the whole conversation around Stonehenge is a really good example of that. It's not really about the archaeology. It's about how human beings want to identify with that place and what that place actually means to them. How then do we exist in there and actually start to pick some of those conversations apart? And this is where, for me, it becomes really critical for the CBA. What does this mean for a charity that is trying to promote archaeology in the UK across all the activities that we actually do? And we too face challenges in this process. Why? Well, we face challenges because society is changing, technology is changing, and actually how we change and adapt is going to become really critical, particularly over the next 5 to 10 years, because society and societal change, I think, is going to be really quite rapid. And we can see that in some of the activities we do. So we do quite a lot of print media. Traditionally, we print academic books, we put books about archaeology. We also produce British archaeology 6 times a year. Will we be producing a paper magazine in 5 years' time? I don't know, possibly, but the pressure on the costs of producing that magazine, on the number of people who read it, quite literally mean we might need to be doing something else. And this is borne out in some of the other activities we now do. We don't just publish a magazine. We have a live YouTube site. We have a website. We actually have 2 websites because we've got one for the Young Archaeologists Club as well. We have Twitter accounts, TikTok accounts, Instagram accounts, all of which need managing, but also all of which have different audiences. They have different needs. You can't just put one message out there anymore. You actually need to recast your message almost 7 or 8 times if you want to get traction with different audiences. So the whole method of communication is changing, and it's changing really rapidly. That can also then be looked at in terms of what does that mean for a membership organization such as we are. We're starting to see pressure on our membership numbers, and that pressure is looking really interesting because we're actually attracting lots of new members, but our membership numbers aren't always going up. So we've got to understand what's going on there. Is it existing members leaving? Is it people joining but not renewing because actually they want to join for a single reason and then they go away? But also at the same time, what we're seeing is this huge digital reach exploding. You know, the impact of our channels, of our engagement through the website, through YouTube is phenomenal. So annually, we're getting about 5 to 6 million people engagements on our digital channels. What we're saying that's number of times people are viewing our web pages. That's the number of times somebody gets our newsletter and clicks through to go and see some other form of digital media, whether it's our YouTube channel or it's our social media channels. When we look at the Festival of Archaeology and we monitor what the hashtag Festival of Archaeology is doing each year, we are getting this incredible digital impression. So in 2022, it was 84 million. Last year, it was 90 million over the months of June, July, and August. That's how many times that hashtag is effectively being seen. What does that mean about how we strengthen and deepen and reimagine engagement through these platforms? Before Christmas, to try and bring this all together, we've been doing some work about what the future strategy of the CBA will be, what our funding will be. And we've actually just been working on putting an application to the National Lottery Heritage Fund. And to gain some more information, we did a rapid survey of archaeological groups and societies. We did it in 2 groups. We reached out to the organizations that are already members of the CBA, and then we reached out to organizations that weren't members of the CBA, just through a call out through social media. And we had over 250 responses. And the results, we're still working through them. The report's going to be finished in early February, but some of the initial results are really interesting. So the first result I'm showing you here is the age of being in existence of these organizations, archaeological groups and societies. So the grey lines are organisations that are members of the Council for British Archaeology. The orange lines are organisations that are not members of the Council for British Archaeology. And then the blue line is a combined total. And what's absolutely fascinating you see here is those organisations that are primarily under 24 years old are not members of the CBA, or more of them are not members of the CBA than are members of the CBA. And those organisations that are over 50 years old, more of them are members of the CBA. And I think what we're seeing here is the legacy of the CBA's origin 80 years ago out of the Congress of Archaeological Societies. And also what we're seeing with those younger groups is the impact of the National Lottery Heritage Fund, 30 years of investment in grassroots community activity. You're seeing much these younger groups. What's really interesting when you play that through the data is you can start to see very small indications of how this reflects through other aspects. And again, we'll be looking at that in more detail as we go through the survey. But some real headline issues to start to looking at. Most of the groups are small, okay? So well over 50% are actually have under 100 people in them. So again, what are we looking at here about localism, and what does actually local engagement actually mean? How do we reach effectively these groups and organisations which are spread across the whole of the UK? This won't surprise you. We are also looking at organisations and groups where their average age is over 50, primarily hugely over 50. What does that mean for the long-term viability and sustainability of these groups? And again, it's not that new people aren't coming into them necessarily, but it's the sense in those groups of them aging, and that comes out in the rest of the data. When we ask them, what do they think the three most critical issues are that they or challenges, what comes across is this concept: aging membership, aging volunteers, yes, lack of funding, but also really interestingly, if you look in these middle ones here, it's the lack of time, the lack of volunteers to help deliver activities, the lack of volunteer help to plan activities and to undertake administrative roles. Lack of time. So again, how might we actually help organisations address that time issue? When we ask organisations what areas of support they might want, it comes overwhelming over how do they get more volunteers, how do they get younger volunteers, how do they get more members, and again, what they think about funding. For me, the most interesting statistic in this one, the most interesting result, is they're not asking for more help about audience development. They want younger people, they want more volunteers, they want more members, but they're not yet really focusing on what the issues around audiences are. Who are their potential audiences? How might they actually reach them? And again, it's really interesting when you look at their aspirations looking for, sorry, hang on, let me go back. It's really interesting when you look at who they might want to work with. So we've asked some very specific questions. What non-heritage organizations are you currently working with? And again, we were really surprised that 90% of people gave the answer of who gave it, that they're working with other groups or non-heritage partners was not applicable to them. They weren't doing it at the moment. But that then changed almost completely when we asked, well, who would you like to work with in the future? And then we get this complete change. Groups really want to know how to work with the youth sector better, arts sector, issues around health and well-being. That change is absolutely dramatic. So again, for me, this is screaming out, what role does the CBA have to play in helping these groups reimagine their audiences and reimagine their network and collaborators? Obviously, key issues again around sustainability. We wanted to find what the sort of temperature was about groups addressing issues around sustainability and particularly around net zero. We asked two questions, one a general introduction and then one straight off question around net zero. So how many groups are are or planning to undertake work around developing sustainable practices. Okay, and again, well over 45% said they weren't doing that. Only 30% are looking to actually do that. And when we ask that net zero question, almost entirely it's no, they don't have any plans to become carbon zero by 2030. So again, a real area where we might be able to help groups and also help present groups as part of that carbon challenge that's out there, because they're acting locally. So they're actually already doing quite a lot in this sphere. How do we actually help them present that? These things for me come together to almost reflect a really the really big issue for the CBA that's facing us. It's what I call our mountain range that we've got to get over. We have to work out how we get over it within the next 2 years, and we have to be traveling over it within the next 5 years. And that's how do we reimagine ourselves as a membership organization. We've seen these changing demographics around the age of people who are in membership organizations. Societal change means that people don't need to join groups to participate anymore. They can stay in their sitting rooms and just go on Facebook. What will that mean for us? What will that mean for our membership numbers? How will we create a package that people will want to buy into? Often quite ephemerally. They might buy a small product and then they might buy it for a month and not keep it, but then they might come back again in 3 months' time. We really need to start looking at what that relationship is going to be and what sort of platforms, particularly digital platforms, we're going to need to actually survive in that world. And that comes back to this whole concept of audiences. Understanding our audiences is absolutely critical. We've been doing some work with Historic England, who've created a new series of audience segmentation pen portraits. So again, what they're just looking at is they're looking at their audiences and they're trying to understand what motivates them, what they like, what they don't like, and how that relates to heritage. And they've come up with 7 different pen portraits, which are all fascinating, and they're all really detailed. But again, for a charity like us, it's really challenging. Trying to communicate to 7 different audiences is expensive business. They all need different things. What we've done is try to actually take those audiences, the Historic England ones, and understand if we could group them together a little bit, what do they actually mean? And we're starting to think about our audiences in 3 broad buckets. The first one is known to archaeology. That's that 25,000 that I talked about earlier. They're people who'll be familiar with our language. They know that we exist. These are people who should be members of the CBA. They're not always members of the CBA. We should be able to attract them really quite easily to our mission and our cause. The next group we call new to archaeology. These are people who probably love heritage. They love being outdoors. They love being active, but they might not have made that link to archaeology yet. And so for something like the Festival of Archaeology is a really important platform for us to reach people who might be visiting visitor attractions, and we get an opportunity to tease them with archaeology and bring them into the conversation that way. And then finally, there is the audience we look at where we call Archaeology Why Me? Now, this group's really interesting as it relates to only one of the Historic England pen portraits. That's what they call their blue group. And that group, they are very young, they are very urban, and they are very ethnically diverse. But also, interestingly, that single group makes up 1/3 of the population. How do we adapt our communication style to have an effective conversation with them? And what's really important here, we need to change the way we behave. We need to change the way we think, because we need to move towards them. They really do probably like heritage, but not in the same concept as we define heritage. So there needs to be a lot of work in exploring how we do that redefining process. And in that, you start to really understand some of the issues that actually face us moving forward. When that audience segment, that 1/3 of the population is concerned, issues of representation are really, really important. And we know, again, from profiling the profession, our survey of archaeological groups and societies for 2018, and rerunning it in Taking the Temperature, that archaeology in the UK is predominantly white. In the region of 97% of people involved in archaeology are white. Now, that is not representative of society today. We need to do something about that representation issue. How do we reflect society better? Part of that is understanding issues of legacy around archaeology, issues of narratives and discourse, and how archaeology is being used, and in both now and in the past, to create very dominant and overbearing narratives. And then finally, most importantly, we need to understand this issue of othering. And the best way to understand othering is actually to think of the opposite of othering. The opposite of othering is belonging. How do we create a sense of belonging where anyone feels they can come into the archaeological family and engage and be part of it and actually recognize themselves in it? It's a really important way of actually reimagining what it is we do. We don't want everyone to be the same. We just want people to feel they can belong. And indeed, we've been really proactive in actually operating in this area, understanding the importance of stories and narrative and people and the way we actually tell these stories. And again, it becomes a really important part to understand the depth of archaeology. The more people who make up the ingredients and the recipe, the deeper, the richer the actual outcome of that recipe is. The conversation becomes so much richer and so much more relevant. We are seeing it through activities we are now driving forwards within the Young Archaeologists Club, and broadening the Young Archaeologists Club, taking it back into schools so that we can see how it works in that sphere and that area. Through our Festival of Archaeology and our desire to try and find a theme to the festival each year, we can start to be really proactive at bringing people in to creating conversations that become really meaningful. And this year's theme is Archaeology and Community, celebrating the fact that it's our 80th anniversary and our origin out of those archaeological groups and societies through the Congress of Archaeological Societies. It also enables us to create really great resources and to think about the impact of our resources and what people need to actually do. So again, if you go to our website now, it's populated with all sorts of resources to help you understand how you can engage and do things through archaeology, through the medium of archaeology, and in local environments where you might live. It's also why we created This is Archaeology, in order to be really proactive about saying what archaeology is, and not just resting on this concept that archaeology is a study of the material culture of the past. It's not. It's something so much more than that. And we've been doing it now, This is Archaeology, for 2 years. And also in this time, we've actually been running them fantastic letters to a young archaeologist in conjunction with Birkbeck University. This was the idea of Leslie McFadden at Birkbeck, where she had seen the concept of letters to a young architect and really wanted to do it for archaeologists. We've done it for 2 years, and I've got a little bit more to show on that in a moment. We also need to do it because actually it strengthens our advocacy role, it strengthens our casework role. So again, we are really, really concerned about the state of funding, the state of cuts that are actually coming forward. We've seen that in Wales, where there is really quite catastrophic cut proposed to Cadw and the Welsh Royal Commission. What does that actually mean? For us, we have a formal role in the planning process around listed building consents, but if that structure and that funding's not there, it won't work. So we really do have to maintain our vigilance and our power to actually write to government on these issues. We need to be out there talking about this constantly. That's me, and it's the rest of the team. It's also our trustees, it's our volunteers. It's about talking about the power of archaeology. What does it actually mean? How can people engage with it? And for me, this is where I like to talk about the power of archaeology in terms of curiosity, inquisitiveness, and creativity. Archaeology is all of these things in spades, in bucket loads. It is a really powerful way of thinking about the world when you reimagine it like this. And my best example of demonstrating why archaeology has a power is actually around this site I was involved in excavating in 2003. This was a chariot found on the upgrade of the A1 in Yorkshire near the town of Castleford. And after it was found, all the archaeologists wanted to call it the Castleford Chariot, until this lady came along, and what she said was, and why her name's gone completely out of my, Alison Drake. Alison Drake. So Alison came along and she ran the local heritage group, the Castleford Heritage Group, and she told all the archaeologists, you're not going to call it the Castleford Chariot. And they all couldn't understand why, until she pointed out, this chariot's not found in Castleford, it's found near Castleford, but it's actually found in the ward of Ferry Fryston. And you will call this chariot the Ferry Fryston chariot. And when everyone asked why, her answer was simple. Ferry Fryston is the third most deprived ward in West Yorkshire. By calling this the Ferry Fryston chariot, you will immediately bolster the feeling of the young people in this ward. You will give them aspiration. You will give them new meaning. You will give them a story they can be proud about. It's a really powerful testament to this idea that you actually need to relate things back to local communities and people who might actually gain some benefit from it. My favourite headline, of course, was the chariot that swung low on the A1. Why? It was in fact released to the press in the same month that England won the Rugby World Cup. Well, everyone likes a good headline. We are also seeing impact in this area now and in this conversation that we're actually doing. So again, through our youth engagement work and our YAC census, we're actually delighted to be able to say that the Young Archaeologists Club in the UK is reflective of British society today. Indeed, it is probably the only part of British archaeology that is reflective of society and the makeup of society, and possibly the only heritage organisation that is as well. It's a really clear result about the aims and objectives of what we're trying to do with our youth engagement, and particularly our Young Archaeologists Club, is to make it relevant to society today. Wonderfully, we have just established a youth advisory board at the CBA. It came into being last year. We now have 12 fantastic young people who meet effectively to help guide us in what our voice around youth engagement will be, what our wider voice will be, and actually to act as a sounding board for some of the things we actually might want to do. And this is to two members of the Youth Advisory Board that I'm going to turn now to finish my presentation, to let you hear from them. I'm going to let you listen to George and Ahini. They have both done short recordings based on letters to a young archaeologist. So in 2022, we had 12 letters from archaeologists to young archaeologists. In 2023, we had 12 organisations reflect back on those 12 letters. And in December, our Youth Advisory Board all reflected back on the letters that they read from last year. And what I want to do now is just let you listen to George and then Ahini talk about archaeology from the perspective of young people.
Hi everyone, I'm George and I'm one of the Council for British Archaeology's Young Advisors. Reflecting on the last 2 years of the Letters to a Young Archaeology series, there was one thing that amongst all of the great advice and all of the encouragement stood out to me as being common between all of the letters, and that was an acknowledgement of the importance of us as the future of archaeology and the hope that that seems to bring. There is real belief that we as young archaeologists have the power to bring about positive and lasting change to archaeology, to the climate crisis, to political narratives and to social beliefs, and that we have a lot to offer through our hard work, our imagination and our ideas, and perhaps most importantly through our passion. It's important that we take every opportunity that we can to engage in archaeology and that we make the most of those opportunities to inspire positive change. It's important that we form our own opinions, but perhaps more important that we listen to those of the people around us, especially those who face barriers that we might not know or understand. And in that light, it's important that we make opportunities as much as possible for other people. We should all have a hand in reshaping the future of archaeology and reimagining what it means to be an archaeologist. We need to think not just of those who dig or those who get paid to do archaeology, but also of those who occasionally join digs or those who like to watch documentaries or read books about archaeology. We need to think of all of the people involved in archaeology and the value that they bring. Without any one of these people, archaeology and heritage will suffer. And to those of us who do wish to make archaeology a career, we need to fight this from the inside. We need to reimagine the industry and push it in the right direction every chance that we get. We need to fight outdated views about who can or should be an archaeologist. We need to break down barriers that have prevented so many from accessing archaeology. And we need to take every chance to listen to those around us so that we never forget what is so important, which is that to protect archaeology, we must first protect archaeologists. And finally, to everyone, we are the future of archaeology. We have the power and the potential to bring about positive change to archaeologists, to archaeology, to climate change, to the future of humankind. We must take every opportunity that we have to engage and inspire with archaeology. We are the future of archaeology. We are all archaeologists, and the time to act is now.
Over 2 years, archaeologists at different stages of their careers wrote a letter to a fictional young archaeologist narrating their own experiences within the field and offering perspectives and advice for a career in archaeology. An important theme that seemed to weave through many of these letters was how archaeology transcends the chronological framework commonly associated with it. Archaeology is as much about the present and the future as it is about the past. As this initiative by the Council for British Archaeology and Birkbeck University of London draws to an end, let's look back on some key ideas to piece together what lies ahead in archaeology. Archaeology traces human behavior, an essential component of which is the impact of human actions on our surrounding environment. Understanding how we extracted natural materials over time or modified landscapes as populations grew can help unravel the intricate relationship between past humans and the natural world. We can study how past communities tackled environmental change, their water management or land use strategies, and the impact it had on their lives, potentially traced through health and diseases of the past, to better equip ourselves to alleviate present-day concerns in sustainability or epidemiology. The idea that observing past trends provides a broader perspective on how humans have impacted the surrounding environment over time also translates into burning contemporary issues surrounding inequality, identity, and conflict. In its early days, archaeology was used to justify colonial control, racial supremacy, and fascist outlooks, which resulted in the exoticization and even objectification of people. The interpretation of history was often limited by the homogeneous perspective of the people recording it. Patriarchal views, therefore, often traced journeys into the past. As archaeologists, we must question dominant historical accounts and be aware of the diverse humans behind the traces we study, as it can instill in us the essence of global citizenship. We must break the barriers of othering and literally open up the trench to allow for the sharing of rich personal stories representing diverse backgrounds. For equity and accessibility, the engagement of the public, and especially young voices, in shaping and delivering archaeology in a form relevant to the community or individual is of utmost importance.
You can read more about Letters to a Young Archaeologist on the CBA website. It's a fantastic resource, both by the archaeologists who've done it and the people who have actually responded. And there's some really fascinating ways in which they've done that through using different forms of media. For me, just finishing off here, my final reflections will be the challenge for the CBA is we are a charity. We rely on our membership and we rely on donations. I do have to get really clear that actually becoming a member is the most important thing you can actually do for us. It's not just about getting your magazine, which you do 6 times a year, or your newsletters. It's actually understanding this cause that we are representing and this mission that we actually have around archaeology and participation, and really identifying and understanding how we break down those barriers to participation so that we can share this amazing discipline that we actually do. So please, if you know anyone who's not a member, encourage them to become a member. You can donate to us, you can sign up to our newsletter. really how you help us do that helps us get young people involved, helps us promote the Festival of Archaeology and carry out our statutory duties through our role as in casework and advocacy. If you're interested in finding out more about what we actually do and our next actual lecture, then come along to our AGM. It's on Saturday, the 10th of February. It's online. You can go onto the website and sign up now. And we're absolutely delighted that this year our key Beatrice Dicardi lecture is going to be given by Dr. Amara Thornton, who is going to be talking about peopling archaeology's past with beyond notability. It's a fantastic project exploring early female archaeologists, and they're written large in the CBA's history when you actually see people like Catherine Kenyon being there at the first meetings, and indeed Beatrice Dicardi herself, who was our longest running secretary. It's going to be an absolutely fascinating presentation, so please do come along to that. And then, of course, we have our next This is Archaeology lecture, which will be exploring again those connections to the 80 years of the CBA through understanding the Nautical Archaeological Society. And Peter Knott is going to come and talk to us on Thursday, the 15th of February, online at 7 p.m. So again, please do go over to the website and have a look there. I'm going to just do one more slide now because, again, it's about thanking you, thanking all of you who are members, those who might donate and actually offer us support. If you want to donate, please do go to our website or use this QR code. That can get you to platforms where you can donate to the CBA. Obviously, if you are a UK taxpayer, please gift aid it. It means we get 25% extra from the government, really important. Your support really means a difference to the way we can actually undertake our work and how effective we are. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Neil. That was fantastic. Where to start? There's so many questions. I have so many notes written down. We do have a little bit of time. I know we've just hit 8 o'clock, but I think we will stay on for a little bit longer. So if you do have any questions for Neil, pop them in the Q&A, and we'll go through some of those now. While those are coming in, Neil, I've got a question for you. And I was kind of thinking about what's next and the future, and like, what would be the one thing, if you had to pick one thing, pie in the sky, it can be, kind of money is no object. What's the one thing that you would like to see that's different in the next kind of 5 to 10 years in archaeology?
What's the one thing I'd like archaeology to be more reflective of humans that exist today. We are the people who create the stories. We are the people who create the narratives. The material we encounter does not have a voice until we come along and ascribe that voice to that material. So actually us understanding ourselves is by far and away, for me, the most important thing that we actually have to do. It's making archaeology, in a sense, more reflective. And I think if we can do that, we can write richer, deeper narratives, but also I absolutely passionately believe archaeology then becomes super relevant to society today and the challenges we face today. Yeah, we are really privileged in that we can take the totality of human existence on this planet and create a story and a narrative that's relevant to surviving on this planet today. There is no other discipline that does that.
Absolutely, that's brilliant and exciting too, isn't it? Exciting to see where that will take us.
Yeah,
for sure. So I'm going to flip to the opposite end of the scale now and go back to the beginning. We've had a question which asks, are there any of the objectives of the CBA's founding articles that you would edit or replace? If you could have written a letter to the young CBA, what would it say?
I don't think I would have changed what they wrote. I think I would have advised them to be mindful about how quickly they can get pushed off course. So one of the things, again, in taking over the CBA, what I've been fascinated about is if you looked at our website 4 years ago and you read the history of the CBA, all it said was we were we were founded to protect and preserve archaeology. Well, when you go back and you read the testaments of those people who did actually found us, that's not what they were talking about. What they were doing was talking about this aspirational approach. What are the opportunities to archaeology? And I think what I would write back to them is, you know, that was such a good pitch and such a good aspiration and clarity. I think I'd have liked them to have had a really clear thing that, you know, you're going to get pushed off course. You've got to make us robust enough not to get pushed off course. And then it might have been really interesting to see where things developed. In hindsight, what's really interesting is you can actually see how most of the later 20th century structures came out of that conversation around the founding of the CBA. So again, our DNA is in loads of different facets around heritage. I suppose I'd like to have written to them and said, your initial aspiration allowed us to think big. Yeah. Brilliant.
That's great. So we've got a few more questions here lined up for you. Got a bit of a long one here, so bear with me. How successful has the CBA been in lobbying in support of the promotion and protection of academic courses of archaeology in the UK in recent years, given the arguments about public value versus income value for universities choosing where to make cuts?
So we were involved very heavily with University Archaeology UK. So the really important thing is we don't exist alone anymore. There is quite an extensive network. So again, through organisations such as the Heritage Alliance. And actually, 2 years ago, there was a move to actually change which organisations could get teaching support. Again, putting teaching support towards more STEM-based subjects. Archaeology was originally set out as actually being defined as not a STEM-based subject, so was going to lose important resources around teaching, particularly around laboratory teaching in universities. With University Archaeology UK, who were really, really impressive in getting together with support from the Heritage Alliance and the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Archaeology. Meetings were able to actually take place, which ensured that archaeology was placed into the STEM group of subjects, which meant it didn't actually have that cost. So in that sense, that network is there. The really challenging thing around archaeological courses and such that is the move of universities to have this such an economic model. And so actually what I think we're often seeing at these times is it's not a subject we don't want archaeology, it's actually what economically is going to make us the most financially viable. And that how do we answer some of those things? We were involved in the discussion around Chester University, and one of the things that really impressed me about Chester University and its fight to retain its archaeology is how they related it to the city of Chester. And they were able to basically fight with the university to say, you lose our archaeology department, you lose your identity as being a Chester University, which was absolutely a really, really clever thing to actually do. So again, you can't just fight these things, you need to broaden that out. And so one of the things we've entered in a longer conversation with University Archaeology UK is how do we raise that broader impact of university research? And it is amazing, you know, British universities have the top 4 archaeological departments in the world. And we should be really proud of that. And we should shout about that constantly.
Absolutely. And I think there's so many other things kind of happening as well, aren't there, around different routeways and pathways into archaeology now too. There are, even when we have those challenges with archaeology departments, we have different ways of doing an archaeology degree coming in with the accredited courses through CIFA and University Archaeology UK as well, don't we? Which hopefully will open up new opportunities to people. While you were talking, while you mentioned financial challenges. Someone was asking in the chat about the challenges around moving away from printed journals, magazines, to digital, and how we create longevity with those things. Because obviously, many of us, have journals that we collect for years, and we kind of refer back to journals and papers that come from the founding of the CBA. I know we have our minute book from the very beginning of our existence. So yeah, I mean, how do we go forward into a digital world?
It's a really fascinating thing, and one could argue that actually the amount of energy required to actually store things digitally probably is worse than potentially having a paper version. I don't think those answers are really complex and really hard. But I think, again, in some respects, that conversation isn't necessarily ours. That's for, dare I say, it's for people who might come after us. Yeah. And I only can reflect back through the eyes of my daughter. She doesn't keep anything like that. So, they don't exist in that world. Yeah. They exist in a very different place. And actually, we need to be really mindful of actually how much we're putting our own values onto that actual conversation. Yes, we love all these old things. Yeah. Well, I can also tell you that I have the whole CBA archive that, Claire, it costs money to look after. It costs space to look after. Yes, there is enormous amounts of value there. But actually, how might we reimagine that? I'm also really intrigued on a completely different way of actually looking at it. Might it make us slightly more, I don't know if it's adaptive, but if you've got to constantly keep rethinking because you've always got to reimagine the absence of that piece of information, what does that actually mean about us as being able to think more rapidly? I suppose what I sort of mean by that is, in some senses, archaeology has tried to set it up as itself as creating the ultimate and total and exact knowledge database. Yeah, we know all archaeology. Well, my point is every time someone else is born, they think about it differently. So the knowledge, the concept constantly changes. We will never know it all. We won't know all the answers. And so actually, maybe if we thought better about how we think about the questions, not how we store the answers, we might actually create a more dynamic and reflective, it's about that reflective processing.
Brilliant. It is a really big question, isn't it? And a really
yes,
challenging one that is going to face all of us as we go forward into the future, whether that's kind of us as a UK-wide organisation or smaller kind of groups and societies. And we've had a couple of questions now that kind of link to local groups and regional groups and volunteering. So we've had one which is about the role in the future for regional groups and local archaeology groups. Do you think that will be stronger in the future?
Yes, in some respects, what I think might actually happen is those groups will need to become very dynamic. Yeah, their audiences are going to change. I think we've got to do a big piece of work about who audiences are and what they actually look like. There is absolutely a role to play, again, because what we need to do is network skills and network knowledge. So again, one of the really interesting areas that came out of the taking the temperature conversation was how local groups are finding it really hard to access knowledge, such as things like pottery identification. So actually, what does regionalization and regional groups actually mean around that? How do they relate to the regional research frameworks? How might those regional groups take some sort of ownership of those and actually make them more open and dynamic? It needs to be a multi-layered approach with people working across those things. But we're going to have to reimagine that relationship with more of the local groups. Again, the data is showing that some of the more successful groups are those what I describe as hyper-local organizations. They're either village or they're very, very localized within large urban areas, and they relate directly to their community. And so maybe heritage and archaeology needs to stop thinking of heritage and archaeology groups and think of those community groups and actually how do we work with them.
So we had a great question from Chris actually that I've just spotted, which was how can CBA help turn hobby groups into community engagers? And I love that term, community engagers. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. And it is again, for me, it's about helping them understand that there is a vast network out there already. They're just not called heritage groups or archaeology groups. They're just called people, and for that, we do need to reimagine partly what archaeology is. I mean, the thing I find really interesting is we don't have a terribly successful track record of individuals being able to come into archaeology and just do it by themselves. You know, you need to be part of a group to dig because you need more than one person, otherwise it takes an awful long time. Yeah. But if you look at metal detecting, you can buy a metal detector and go out and metal detect if you've got all the right permissions in place. You can do it as an individual. And then what you do is you come together and you do the collective bit of sharing what you have found and what you think about that. I think we could do some more around that with archaeology, and those initial stages, that curiosity angle, that inquisitiveness I was talking about earlier, about how people can go out and look at things. One of my favorite hobbies, it's probably really sad, but I really quite enjoy it, is when I'm walking along a street or a road, is playing typography with road drains and road repairs. So I like to find a channel that someone's dug and re-tarmacked and see how long I can go along it before another one cuts over the top of it, just by using typology and typography. Yeah, it's stratigraphy rather. So it's, again, there's ways you can do things in actually getting people to be engaged all the time when they're doing things.
Brilliant. And kind of following on from that, we have a question from Karen about how can we find out about volunteering opportunities in our area?
Okay, so that's very good. Obviously, you can get in touch with us. We can help show you where the network actually exists. The CBA groups across the country can actually also help you do that. And again, it's just, you know, nowadays it's about being alive to who your community facilitators are. And there are lots of organizations now that exist solely to help people understand what voluntary opportunities are out there. Again, for the CBA, it's a really important place we need to move into. We need to be far more effective in this. And that is reimagining the CBA network and actually how we become the conduit for opportunities like you've asked. So you come to us and we can then push you into the right direction and help you make those connections.
Brilliant, thank you. Somebody earlier asked if we could put some of the links that we've shared to the festival and Letters to a Young Archaeologist in our follow-up email. So I think we can add some links in there as well about volunteering. And of course, the festival has loads of opportunities for engaging activities that along the lines of what Neil was just talking about how you can get out and explore the places where you live. So hopefully there'll be lots there for you to have a look at and get involved in. I think, Neil, we're gonna leave it there because it is nearly 8:20. We're running over a bit, and we've had some great questions there, and some lovely comments back in the chat as well. I think everyone's really enjoyed hearing from you tonight. Done my job for me. You've promoted our online AGM, and hopefully everybody's going to go away and click on the links and register to join us on Saturday the 10th of February for our online AGM and Archaeology Lecture. It would be fantastic to see you again then. And also to join us for our next This is Archaeology talk by Peter Knott on maritime archaeology, which I think is going to be another fascinating evening. So please do come along to that. And I think Neil also shared an ask to make a donation. Obviously, we offer these lectures for free. So if you've enjoyed yourself this evening, please do think about making a donation or becoming a CBA member. And then you can keep up to date with all of our activities and events throughout the year. Neil, thank you very, very much. That was fantastic. I've got one last question for you. I was going to ask you if you could tell, if you had one thing to ask everybody that's still here this evening to do, what would their takeaway be to go away and do in terms of engaging with archaeology and helping to take it forward for the future?
I would just ask them to go away and remember the most important question in archaeology is why. I would advise them they'll never ever get an answer, but they will get literally hundreds of thousands of other questions, and then their interest will never ever be sated because they'll just have questions coming out of their ears, and that leads to participation and activity and engagement. So I want everyone to go away and just look at stuff and say, why?
Brilliant. There you go, folks. That's your takeaway. Go and explore where you live and start asking some more questions. Why? I hope you've enjoyed this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a good rest of the evening. Thanks very much. Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.